As a developer, you of course test your code, and that could include a set of automated tests as well as some manual testing. And the same goes for the schemas that you have in Enterspeed, as it's also just code. In this video, I'll show you some of the tools that we have in Enterspeed to help you test your schemas. So here I have a small schema for a content page, and I want to test if that schema is working. So to do that, I click the source entities and test button down here in the bottom right corner, and that brings me up a list of source entities. I can then click the test button here, and I can see that my schema is working, and I got the map out the properties that I was expecting. I can test my schema against different source entities, so maybe the source entities have different data. See if that's actually working, and yes, it's also working here. Perfect. Of course, I can only test my schema against the types that is actually defined within my schema. So in this case, the content page. That means that I cannot test my schema against a type of product or a type of home. That makes sense. So let's try to extend the schema a bit. So to do that, I click the source entity just to bring up what properties do I actually have on a source entity of type content page. So I want to map out a property called image URL. And the value of that image URL comes from custom images here. So I just want to take the first element in the array and take the URL property. So type p.custom images, and I'll just take the first element in the array and the URL property. I click the test button once again, and we can see the schema is working, and I now have my image URL here with the custom image. Cool. Well, what happens if, let's say, the editor did not provide any custom images? So how do I actually test my schema in that case? To do that, I can basically just copy the source entity here, go to JSON, and here I can paste it in. So here I can just change the value of the source entity and test against different scenarios. So for this case, it was the custom images. So if I remove the element, so I just have an empty array here and test my schema, you can see the schema is actually failing. And it's failing because it says it cannot read properties of undefined reading URL. And we can also see it's in line 19. So if we go into line 19, we can see here, and it's because we don't have any elements in the array. Okay, so to fix that, I could use the optional chaining operator here. That means that my schema will not return an error, but it will just return undefined for the value of the image URL. So instead of an undefined, I want to use the main image URL instead as a fallback value. So I can type that main image URL like this. Okay, so if I test my schema once again, we can now see that I got the value from my main image instead of the custom image. And if I go back once again, add the custom image once again, test it, I get the custom image. Cool. So now my schema is actually working. I tested against different scenarios. Another thing that is important to test is your partial schemas. So down here in line 21, we can see, or line 20, we can see that we are looping through a property of content blocks, and for each content block, we are referring to a partial schema. So how do we test that partial schema? Well, basically in the same way. So here I have the source entity, and with the content blocks, I have one content block in my array right now. So if I just take that element here, that's the value that we are passing into the partial schema. So if I go to find my partial schema, yeah, I also have a test pane here. So if I paste the value in here like this and click test, then we can see that the partial schema itself is also working. And we got the text and the alias property. That's what we are mapping from the schema right here. So this is a way that you can test your partial schemas individual without having to test the root entity that the partial is referenced from. The last thing that I want to show you that is also useful when you are testing your schemas is the log. So if we go into settings and logs, here you can actually see what's happened on the tenant that you're working on. You can filter on different time spans, you can filter on the levels of the log entries that we have. So if we look at the log here, we can actually see that we had an error here. If I click it, we can see that this was the error that we actually got when we're testing the schema. So we cannot read properties of undefined in line 19. So this could also be very useful if you maybe have deployed your schema, but you're ingesting a new entity and that entity is not generating a view. It could be that this entity has, let's say, an empty array like we did in our test here. And because of that, the schema is failing. So this is very useful for that case. I hope this gave you some ideas of how you can work with your schemas, how you can test your schemas, and how you can test it in different scenarios and with different data. That's all for now. Bye.